Okay, so what we're doing today is we're going to make a shortbread style cookie, and we're going to base it off of this book. So if we look at this book, we see that it lists the ingredients of cookie dough. This book ratio lists the ingredients of cookie dough as 3 parts flour, 2 parts fat, 1 part sugar. So that 3-2-1 by weight is going to be the ratio that we have between the flour, fat, and sugar. So for me, I'm going to use about 90 grams of flour, about 60 grams of fat, about 30 grams of sugar, which will be about 3/4 cup flour, about 1/8 of a cup of sugar, and about 4 tablespoons of butter, except I'm actually going to end up using Crisco for this set instead. And the Crisco will give me that'll be about the same as 5 tablespoons of Crisco. But I'm going to do all of it by measuring weights. Before we start any of that, though, we first need to start preheating the oven. So I've started the oven preheating to 350 degrees, and that's going to be where we start the oven, and I'm going to start mixing ingredients for the cookie. So here's my work surface. The basic ingredients for the cookie are just the flour, fat, and sugar. So I'm going to start out by measuring out my fat. The fat I'm using is Crisco. You could use butter instead if you prefer, but I'm going to use Crisco in this one, which means I need 60 grams of fat. So I just measure out my 60 grams of fat. This is, if you're using butter, this is about 4 tablespoons or half a stick of butter. If you're using Crisco, this is about 5 tablespoons of Crisco. And that gives me 62, so I'll take out just a little bit of that. A little bit more. 60.4 grams, I'm going to call that close enough. Next, I'm going to add in the sugar. And since it's a 1-to-2 ratio, since I use 60 grams of fat, I need half that much sugar. So I'm going to be using 30 grams of sugar. This is about 1/8 of a cup, or about 2.5 tablespoons of sugar. So we add our sugar. 30 grams of sugar, so I'm going to just set the tare, 0 it, and go to 30 grams. I went a little bit too high. Got 30 grams of sugar, and the next ratio is about 90 grams of flour. That's about 3/4 of a cup. So 0 my scale, and I'm going to 90 grams on the flour. There we go, 90 grams of flour. And that's the basic ingredients we need. At this point, I'm going to stop taking measurements of weight. But if I use this for my cookie, it'll have the right textures. It'll be a reasonable cookie, but it's not going to taste very good. It's going to be incredibly bland. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in flavorings. And I personally like a cookie that is a little bit less sweet and a little bit more savory. So I'm going to add some spices into mine. And so I'm going to add a little bit of salt, because I think salt does a nice job of counteracting the sweetness of the sugar that's in the cookie. So I'm using diamond crystal salt, so this so I'm a little bit more generous than I would be if I were using Morton salt. Put in salt about like that. And then I'm going to add sumac. The sumac gives a flavor that is kind of like adding citrus peel or something like along those lines, like a citrus zest. It's kind of a savory and sour zing to it. So I'm going to add some of that. And then I want to add a little bit of a bitter note. And I'm going to do that by adding black tea. But the black tea I'm picking is this lapsang souchong, which is a smoked tea. And so this is also going to add a smoky note to these cookies. So I'm going to add a little bit of lapsang souchong. And there is the ingredients for my cookies. Now, it's tempting to grab a spoon and mix this all together, but I don't want to actually use a spoon because if I do, I'm going to get too even mixing and I won't get the nice crumb that I want in a shortbread cookie. So instead, I'm going to be using my fingers. And just stick fingers in, surround the fat, and you're pushing the flour through the fat. Once you've done that enough, your fingers will be sticky and covered, but it will form into a nice lump of dough. So because I'm on video and I can cheat, I'm going to suddenly time-lapse to clean fingers. And I'm back with a pan to put them on. So this amount of this amount of ingredients, I've got about 180 grams of ingredients plus a little bit for flavorings and minus a little bit for what was stuck to my fingers and I washed off. So we're at about 180 grams of ingredients. If I make 5 cookies, that's 36 grams per cookie, which seems like a fairly decent size for a cookie. So I'm going to break this into 5 pieces and try to get them equally sized. So I like to line my pan with a Silpat, but you can use anything you want. And I'm just going to find some way to get about an even 5 split. So that looks to me like if I do there and there and there, that looks like about 5 relatively even pieces. And the more important than getting them to all be exactly the same size is that they're all the same height. One thing you don't have to worry about is this cookie will not spread out very much on you, so you don't need to make sure that they've got lots of space around them, but you need to make sure they're all the same height. So I'm going to shape the 5 cookies into roughly the same height. This is probably about 7 or 8 millimeters high, a little under a centimeter. And that's about where I'm going to leave it. Those are my cookies. So those I'm going to be putting in the oven at 350 degrees, which timing couldn't be better because my oven just beeped saying that I had reached that temperature. So these go in the oven. I expect that this will take about 20 minutes, maybe more like 25 minutes, but I'm going to probably check them at about 20 minutes and start checking to see if they're done. What I'm looking for to see if they're done is I'm looking to see that the edges are starting to get some discoloration coming up most of the side, maybe even a little bit of discoloration right around the edges at the top, but it might not get to quite that point. And the tops will be a little bit silky and very hot to the touch. You don't want to touch them, and they'll leave marks and impressions if you touch them. Once it's cooled, your cookies will look about like this. And this cookie, if you touch it at the beginning, you'll leave marks on the top. But once it's cooled, it is about like this, and it will give you a nice snap if you break it in half. And when you look at the crumb, you'll see that there is a nice crumb to it. And that's what I'm looking for in my ideal shortbread cookie.